Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the most dense, specialized source material you can find, strip away the jargon, and give you the essential knowledge, the foundational structure you need to be instantly informed.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. Today, we are diving into a truly unique set of sources. We aren't analyzing a historical event or, a market trend, but rather a structured, almost architectural blueprint for education.
For character formation, really.
Exactly. Specifically, we're looking at a methodology for ideological pedagogy aimed at young people. Our core documents, they stem from this work titled Binā al Aqadī al-Aid.
Which translates roughly to the ideological construction for the rising generation.
Right. And this is authored by Ahmed and published by Tawhid Studies and Research.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today is to move past the topic itself and really focus on the engineering of it. We're here to dissect the precise framework that's presented in this material.
The blueprint.
The blueprint, yeah. We're talking about the proposed methodology, the strategic objectives, and the specific defensive measures that are used to develop what the author intends to be a cohesive and intellectually robust and a profoundly defensible belief system in the rising generation.
It's a fascinating look at curriculum design that's focused entirely on conviction.
It is.
Feels less like a curriculum and more like, an operating system upgrade, one that's specifically designed for a modern, very complex world.
That's a great way to put it.
And to really analyze the schematics for this whole construction, we have to start with the foundational component, the core term itself. What exactly is the author defining when they use this term Aqeedah?
So Aqeedah is the Arabic term for creed or doctrine or belief system. But if we just leave it at that, we miss the entire point of the document.
Okay.
What's fascinating here, and what the source spends a significant amount of time establishing, is the choice of the word construction, or albina. That implies engineering.
Right. It's an active process.
It's a very active process. This is not simply about transferring a set of facts or, a list of rules. The source defines Aqeedah as the systematic and comprehensive framework for interpreting and engaging with the entire universe.
Wow.
It's the philosophical bedrock that dictates not just what you believe, but how you act, how you think, how you feel. The goal of this albina, this construction, is to ensure the belief system is deeply rooted, meticulously structured, and intellectually resilient against, the constant pressure of external philosophical and intellectual challenges.
So it's a complete worldview paradigm.
A complete worldview paradigm that must be built, not just, absorbed passively.
That makes the stakes very, very high. If we're analyzing the blueprint for this kind of mental fortress, let's look at why they feel this is such an urgent necessity for the youth today. The source material doesn't present this ideological construction as like a nice to have. It frames it as utterly essential.
Oh, absolutely.
For the survival and intellectual stability of the rising generation in the current environment. What are the core reasons the document highlights for this profound sense of urgency?
Well, the author details two main, and they're sort of overlapping, reasons for this construction. Both of them relate to protection in what they see as a very volatile modern environment.
Okay, protection.
The first reason is structural. The Aqeedah serves as the fundamental foundation, or al-asas, upon which every future personal or societal endeavor has to rest.
The bedrock.
The bedrock. And the document is quite prescriptive here. It argues that all subsequent structures, things like moral behavior, ethical decisions, legal frameworks, even social interactions, are just superstructures built on top of this philosophical foundation.
I see.
Without a strong, clear, and unified al-asas, any action, no matter how well-intentioned, will ultimately be fragile. It'll be unstable and liable to, catastrophic collapse under stress.
So it's like trying to build a skyscraper on shifting sand.
That's the exact analogy. The foundational creed provides the stability and the coherence that's necessary for a functional life.
Okay, so stability is reason number one. What's the second reason for this urgent necessity?
The second reason is defensive. The Aqeedah has to function as a protective shield, or al-mana.
Al-mana?
Yeah, providing immunity against external intellectual challenges. The document basically says that the modern age is defined by this intense information saturation, radical globalization of ideas, and critically, constant exposure to contradictory and challenging worldviews.
You can't avoid it.
You cannot avoid it. And this environment subjects young people to relentless intellectual assaults, which the text refers to as doubts or confusions. The word is shubuhat.
Okay, shubuhat.
So therefore, the ideological structure must be built not just to exist, but to proactively immunize the individual. The source really stresses that a weak belief system is essentially defenseless.
It's vulnerable.
Completely. The strength of the foundational conviction directly correlates with the resilience of the individual to, let's call it, intellectual infiltration. If the belief system is the fortress, al-Manā is the reinforced wall that withstands the siege.
That analogy of construction of architecture, it really is extremely precise then.
Yeah.
You need that strong, deep foundation and those well-fortified walls to withstand what you're calling the coming informational storms.
Exactly.
So moving from the why to the what are the actual structural components? What are the core foundational pillars or Arkan al-Aqeedah that are identified in the source?
The document identifies 3 fundamental pillars. These are presented as the non-negotiable anchors for the entire worldview. These elements have to be instilled with absolute certainty because they're what define reality and destiny.
Okay, 3 pillars. What's the first one?
The first pillar, which is described as the ultimate foundation, the axis of everything, is the unity of Allah. Ta. Yes. The construction document views this as the singular truth from which all other understanding flows. On a philosophical level, it means establishing the uniqueness of the divine and requiring pure, unmixed devotion.
And on a practical level?
On a practical level, the source suggests that this pillar is crucial because it provides coherence. I mean, if the ultimate authority is unified and singular, then the resulting system of ethics and law must also be unified and coherent.
Right, prevents internal contradiction.
It prevents internal contradiction in your values and your purpose. It all flows from one source.
Okay, so if that's the ultimate source of reality, the second pillar then must address how that source communicates with humanity.
Exactly right. The second pillar is prophethood, or Risala. This establishes the authentic communication channel, the definitive means by which humanity receives divine guidance.
So it's the link.
It's the link. By affirming the veracity of the revealed message and the prophet as the messenger, this pillar provides the necessary moral, spiritual, and practical framework for applying the principles of Tawhid to daily life.
So without it, the first pillar is just an abstract idea.
Precisely. Without Risala, the first pillar, Tawhid, it just remains an abstract philosophical concept. It's impossible to translate into actionable ethics or law. It's the instruction manual for the foundation.
And the third?
Finally, the third pillar is resurrection and the afterlife, Ma'ad. This is arguably the most motivational and purpose-driven pillar of the 3.
Why is that?
Because it establishes the reality of eternal accountability and recompense. And that, in turn, instills meaning into earthly existence. The document is very clear that this pillar prevents the individual from becoming fully consumed by temporal, material concerns.
What the text calls al-mahash al-huth.
Exactly, the pursuit of immediate experience and gratification. Ma'ad ensures that ethical choices and intellectual pursuits have an ultimate, enduring value. And that's vital when we get to addressing the characteristics of the modern generation.
So the foundation is laid. Reality is defined by the singular divine, guidance is received through the prophet, and accountability is established by the afterlife. But, again, why build this elaborate construction process? What is the finished product supposed to achieve? What are the stated objectives for the learner?
The objectives move significantly beyond just, rote memorization or compliance. The overall goal is to produce a self-sufficient individual who is capable of deep, stable conviction and critical analysis.
Okay, so what's the first objective?
The first objective is establishing certainty, Yakin. This means moving the learner past any intellectual, emotional, or psychological doubt to a firm, unshakable conviction about the core beliefs.
Unshakable.
Unshakable. The force emphasizes that belief without Yakin is inherently unstable and vulnerable. Under pressure, it's that certainty that maintains the structural integrity.
Okay, that sounds incredibly rigid, though. I have to inject some intellectual tension here. If the primary goal is unshakable certainty, Yakin, how does the document reconcile that rigidity with the need for intellectual growth? The possibility that genuinely novel, beneficial information might exist outside this constructed framework.
Right.
Doesn't extreme certainty risk creating a closed mindset?
That's an excellent point, and it's a tension that the author absolutely anticipates. And the response lies directly in the second objective, which is designed specifically to prevent that kind of rigidity and actually promote engagement,
Which is
developing critical consciousness. Wainaki. And this is where it gets really interesting. It's a non-negotiable element of the modern methodology. Wayanaki is the intellectual toolkit that ensures the individual is not closed off, but is rather intellectually armed.
Armed. So it's a defensive tool.
It's a proactive tool. It trains the mind not just to accept the core beliefs, but to actively analyze, evaluate, and critique contradictory ideas without being overwhelmed or destabilized by them.
So it's a kind of disciplined intellectual analysis. Can you elaborate on how the document suggests this critical toolkit actually functions?
Absolutely. It involves teaching what you might call forensic philosophy. The learner is trained in deconstruction.
Deconstruct.
Yeah. For instance, when they encounter a conflicting worldview, say a purely materialist philosophy, they aren't just told that's wrong, they're taught to deconstruct its foundational premises.
Okay, like what?
Like, what are its sources of authority? What are its internal logical inconsistencies? What are the philosophical fallacies that are underpinning its arguments?
So you're stress testing the other ideas.
You are. This critical consciousness is the deliberate answer to that chaotic information environment we talked about, the tada afkar. By teaching the learner to recognize the logical holes, the erroneous sources mandero kare, and the methodological flaws in competing claims, they don't fear external ideas. They engage with them from a position of intellectual strength. And this actually confirms, rather than questions, their own internal structure. It transforms a challenge into a reinforcement.
That provides a huge sense of security, which I imagine naturally leads to the third objective, building immunity, mana. This is the practical result of that successful structural engineering.
Precisely. Immunity, mana, is the desired outcome of the whole construction process. It means creating that intellectual and emotional resilience to those doubts, the shubuhat.
So it's the end state.
It's the end state. If the foundation, the pillars, is solid, and the analytical tools, the Wayanaki, are sharp, then the individual possesses an intellectual buffer. Doubts are encountered, they're processed, and they're neutralized because the core belief system is strong enough to withstand penetration and destabilization.
It's the assurance that the fortress can weather the bombardment.
That's it.
So we have the ideological grounding and the intellectual objectives. Now we need to look at the practical instructional methods, the step-by-step procedure that supposedly delivers this critical consciousness and immunity.
Right, the how.
Exactly, the how. We're shifting now from the why and the what to the how. How does the source material prescribe the delivery of this dense structural content to young learners? What are the primary methodological principles for the instructors?
The methodology is highly prescriptive. It focuses on precision, authority, and internalization. The first foundational principle is clarity and simplicity. Al-watawa basata.
Clarity and simplicity.
Yes. The text warns sharply against using ambiguous, overly complicated, or, philosophical language when you're teaching core beliefs to the young. Confusion is seen as the first step toward doubt.
Just keep it clean.
Keep it clean. The presentation of the core creed has to be explicit, unambiguous, and simple enough to be firmly grasped by the developing mind.
And the second principle?
The second principle reinforces this clarity. It's reliance on direct texts. Nusholama. Instruction has to be firmly grounded in foundational authoritative texts. This emphasizes consistency and precision.
Why is that so critical?
It's critical because by anchoring the belief system in what the source deems as immutable, non-subjective truth, the construction avoids being based on fleeting intellectual trends or personal opinion or, easily disputed interpretations. This reliance ensures that the belief system remains stable across generations and immune to contextual shifts.
Okay, that emphasis on clarity and direct text seems designed entirely to ensure that first objective we talked about, yaqeen, the certainty. But how does the methodology then prepare the youth to handle intellectual pushback? If you only rely on direct text, you risk failing that Wayanaki objective, the critical consciousness part.
Right, and that's the genius of the methodology. It integrates the defense directly into the instruction. So the third principle is addressing doubts,
Addressing them head on.
head on. The source explicitly mandates that instructors must proactively acknowledge, analyze, and refute intellectual challenges rather than ignoring them or censoring them.
So you bring the challenges into the classroom.
You bring them in. This proactive approach is essential for building that immunity. By confronting and dismantling specific doubts within a guided, supportive, and methodologically sound environment, the instructor is actually modeling critical consciousness. They're modeling Wayanaki.
So the student learns by watching.
The student learns how to analyze and reject contradictory ideas by observing the intellectual process of their guide. This transforms potential threats into opportunities to reinforce the core structure. It moves the fear of doubt into the confidence of having a proven answer.
I find it remarkable that they dedicate a whole principle to preemptively identifying and responding to those challenges.
Right.
It's not just teaching belief, it's teaching forensic philosophy.
It is.
That moves us into the interactive, interpersonal aspects of the methodology, which must be central given what we know about the modern generation's demands. It sounds like this isn't meant to be a passive lecture series.
It is absolutely not passive. The material strongly emphasizes dialogue and discussion, Aliwar. This is the prescribed mechanism to transition the student from passive reception of truth to active intellectual exchange.
Which directly engages their need for proof.
Exactly. It engages that need for logical proof and verification, the whole Both we'll talk about later. However, and this is a big however, the document draws a very fine and important line here. A line that is central to its practical application.
Right.
It distinguishes sharply between productive, beneficial debate, al-jadal al-lamud, and destructive, useless argument, al-jadal al-bali.
Okay, let's dedicate some serious time to that distinction. That seems like the central teaching moment that separates this kind of construction from, well, mere indoctrination. What constitutes a beneficial debate, and what marks an argument as useless and chaotic?
So, al-jadal al-lamud, the beneficial debate, is defined by its clear intention. It's a debate that's undertaken with the goal of strengthening belief, establishing truth, or clarifying understanding.
Well, it's constructive.
It's constructive, goal-oriented, and focused on methodology and foundational texts. For example, if a student encounters a philosophical argument claiming that moral truth is entirely relative,
All right.
al-jadal al-mamud would involve the instructor guiding the student to analyze the logical consequences of ethical relativism, trace the argument's premise back to its madir al-kala, its sources of error, and then contrast it directly with the established, unified al-isas, the foundation.
So the whole exchange has to lead to greater certainty.
It must. It has to lead to greater yakin. So it's a clinical, intellectual exercise that's designed to strengthen the structure.
Okay, I get that. So what's the other side of the coin?
The other side is al-jadal al-bali, useless argument, which is strictly warned against. This refers to disputes driven by ego, by obstinacy, a desire to win for its own sake, or dwelling on ambiguous, non-foundational issues that only serve to sow chaos and doubt.
So it's noise.
It's noise. The document provides a clear warning. If an exchange moves away from reinforcing certainty and toward empty, chaotic argumentation, the instructor must immediately guide the student away from it. The focus has to always be on productivity, not noise.
And the line is defined by the outcome.
The line is defined by the outcome. Does this discussion increase my understanding and conviction, or is it merely wasting intellectual resources?
That is a profoundly useful, universal litmus test for intellectual life, regardless of the subject matter. Debate is a tool, not a sport.
Exactly.
It should only be used if it serves the higher objective of achieving that yaqeen and man'a. Beyond intellectual engagement, the source material also seems to stress the importance of personal exemplars to ground this theoretical framework.
Yes, because the rising generation prioritizes direct experience. The material highlights the power of positive role models. Al-qatwa al-asana. This is crucial.
Why so crucial?
Because abstract principles, no matter how logically sound or textually proven they are, they need to be made tangible and appealing. Role models provide ethical and practical blueprints for how to embody the Aqeedah. They show the youth that this framework isn't some dusty historical artifact, but a viable, relevant, and attractive way of life that's applicable to contemporary challenges.
They're the living proof that the construction works.
They are the living proof.
So we've covered the general principles, but is there a specific phased approach to instruction that's recommended for the content delivery itself?
There is. There's a required logical progression, and it's designed to build convictions systematically. The process starts with affirmation.
Ifba, affirmation.
So you clearly and simply confirm the core belief using the authoritative text, the Nun al-Mukama. This is the initial establishment of the foundation. It provides the what.
And after the what?
Once that affirmation is clearly established, the instruction immediately progresses to demanding logical proof in defense, dalil. This is the why. This phase provides the clear, reasoned evidence and defense that supports the belief. And it's often derived from observational or rational arguments alongside the authoritative texts.
So it was a 1-2 punch.
It's a sequence that's explicitly designed to preempt intellectual challenges by ensuring that conviction is always backed by reason and text. It makes the structure intellectually sound from the outset. You don't ask the student to accept something blindly. You establish the truth, and then you immediately supply the proof to defend it.
Establish the belief, then supply the defensive armaments. That structured approach seems calculated to deliver maximum resilience. And speaking of defense, let's talk about how the construction is protected once it's built. The document uses terms like fortification and immunity, which suggests that maintaining the structure requires constant, proactive defense. Where does the source suggest this defense should begin?
The defense begins internally, which is a critical distinction from a purely academic approach. The core strategy is internal fortification, Binā al Aqadī.
Binā al Aqadī.
Yes. This emphasizes that the heart, the seat of spiritual, moral, and emotional truth, must be guarded and trained to reject confusion and negative influences. The document stresses that an intellectual defense alone, no matter how logical it is insufficient if the inner self is corrupted or weak.
Emotional static can sabotage a perfect logical argument.
Exactly.
So how do they define fortification of the heart in the context of this ideological construction?
It involves two main efforts, both aimed at motivational alignment. First, reinforcing the fundamental values and distinguishing characteristics of the belief system. So essentially, defining and strengthening the individual's core identity within the framework. This gives them a profound sense of self-worth and belonging that's anchored in the creed.
And the second effort?
Second, and critically, training the heart to maintain purity and sincerity. This ensures that the motivations for belief are genuine and not compromised by the material world, the al-mash al-ver, or by emotional doubt. This internal strength is the necessary first line of defense. If the internal motivation is strong, the intellect has the will to fight off those penetrating external doubts, the shubuhat.
Okay, now for the external, the visible defense structure. We covered Aqeedah, the critical consciousness, earlier. But how does the methodology prepare the youth to actively engage in, or at least withstand, ideological conflict?
This is handled through rigorous intellectual and logical defense. The process involves intensive training in argumentation, al-tadrib, al-jadal, but, and this is key, utilizing only that productive, beneficial debate, al-jadal, al-manid.
Right.
The goal is to equip the youth with the tools of sound arguments, clear reasoning, and logical consistency. This ensures their defense is systematic, proportional, and deeply rooted in both reason and authoritative texts, the dalil and the nuth al-muqama.
So the quality of the argument matters.
Immensely. They are taught that a weak argument, even if it's defending a truth, only serves to weaken the conviction of the listener and the speaker.
And beyond just argumentation.
Well, perhaps the most proactive defense strategy is teaching them to understand the enemy's formation, so to speak. This is done by identifying sources of error, Madir al-Qa'ah.
Can you expand on that, Madir al-Qa'ah? What kind of errors is the text specifically warning the youth about?
This is where the training moves into comparative ideology. The learner is systematically taught common philosophical traps and methodological weaknesses that are inherent in contradictory worldviews.
For example?
For instance, the text warns against relying on subjective emotional experience as a sole source of truth. It warns against ethical relativism, which dissolves the stability of moral codes. And critically, it warns against materialism, which elevates immediate sensory experience, al-mashal-ashur, above the eternal accountability of Allah.
So you're not just building your own fortress, you're learning the weak points in others.
By understanding how errors arise and why philosophical concepts collapse under scrutiny, the individual can preemptively counter intellectual confusion. They are taught not only what to believe, but why competing beliefs are fundamentally flawed or incomplete.
It sounds like they're being taught to spot the weak points in the opposing philosophical foundation before those weaknesses even impact their own structure. How does the document then advise managing the actual conflict when contradictory ideas are encountered in the real world?
The approach is synthesized and it's focused on methodical response and containment. It prioritizes the preservation of the individual's conviction. The overall goal is neutralization, ensuring that defensive efforts aren't wasteful.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
The strategy involves discerning the true nature of the doubt, the shubuhat. You have to ask, is it a deeply intellectual philosophical challenge? Is it an emotional vulnerability arising from a crisis? Or is it merely distracting, useless argument, al-jadal al-bal?
And the defense has to be proportional.
The defense mechanisms must be precisely proportional. For example, a purely intellectual challenge requires logical proofs, the dalil, and an analysis of the Madar al-Ka. An emotional challenge, on the other hand, might require an appeal to the demonstrated stability of the community and the reliability of the role models, the al-Qatwa asana.
So you don't use a hammer for a surgical procedure.
Exactly. This methodological discernment ensures that intellectual and emotional resources are never wasted on pointless disputes, which allows the internal structure to remain fully fortified.
This entire framework is so clearly targeted. It's not a general education plan. It's custom-tailored for the challenges and characteristics of youth today. Let's look at the specific traits of the rising generation that necessitated such a detailed defensive blueprint.
Right.
The source material is very explicit in pointing out the traits of the target audience, the current generation, that make older, more passive teaching methods entirely insufficient. They recognize that what worked 50 years ago simply won't survive today's informational intensity.
That's the key.
So what are the key characteristics that define the modern youth, according to this framework?
The document identifies 3 characteristics that create both unique challenges and, well, necessary adaptations for ideological construction. If we don't understand these traits, the methodology in Section 3 makes no sense.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there is a strong need for proof, el-bath. This generation, more than previous ones, is defined by a pervasive drive for immediate logical justification, for research, for verification. They challenge traditional authority structures readily.
They want to see the receipts.
They want to see the receipts, they want to verify, confirm, and demand evidence, dalil, for themselves. And the document states that if the system does not proactively supply clear, reasoned evidence, the youth will simply use the tools of the modern age, the internet, social media, global networks, to go searching for proof elsewhere.
And often encounter contradictory frameworks in the process.
That's the danger.
That's incredibly insightful. If they challenge authority and demand justification, the old method of, this is true because I said so, or this is true because it's tradition, instantly fails.
It's obsolete, absolutely. And that demand for proof exists in an environment defined by the second characteristic, exposure to contradictory ideas, tak al-afkar.
Right.
Unlike previous generations where conflicting worldviews might have been distant or abstract found perhaps in a university library, modern youth are inherently and constantly exposed to diverse, often diametrically opposed global narratives through their devices.
There's no escaping it.
There's no escaping it. This constant contradiction is the high-pressure environment for which the construction is being built. It demands that high cognitive immunity, the mana we discussed earlier, they have to be equipped through Wainaki to navigate a deeply pluralistic and contradictory world without suffering psychological destabilization or intellectual paralysis.
Which means they're constantly filtering noise.
Mm-hmm.
And the final characteristic you mentioned earlier ties back into that third pillar, resurrection and afterlife mod.
Yes. The third trait is a prioritizing of immediate experience. Al-mashash alo. This generation tends to value direct, contemporary relevance and immediate, tangible experience over purely historical precedent or long-term traditional narratives.
It's the, what does this do for me now mindset.
It's the equivalent of demanding an immediate ROI, return on investment, for every spiritual or ethical pursuit. If a teaching doesn't seem immediately applicable, relevant to their current emotional landscape, or useful for navigating the present moment, they are likely to deem it impractical and just discard it.
That's a huge challenge for a system built on eternal principles.
It is. It means the instruction must place significant emphasis on connecting abstract pillars, like the necessity of ethical integrity or the belief in the afterlife, to tangible, real-world consequences and ethical behavior today. This is why the use of positive role models is so crucial. They provide that immediate, tangible proof of relevance.
So, if the generation demands proof and focuses on the present, how does the methodology we detailed in Section 3 specifically tailor the message to succeed against these unique characteristics?
Well, the methodology is an integrated structural response to these generational traits. The choices made in Section 3 weren't arbitrary at all. They were forced by the traits in Section V.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For example, the strong mandatory emphasis on dialogue and discussion, al-yar, directly addresses their search for proof, the al-bath. By inviting productive debate, al-janal al-mam, and rigorously providing dalil, or proof, the educator validates the learner's intellectual curiosity while channeling it safely within the fortified framework.
So the curriculum is basically saying, yes, question everything, but here are the tools to find the correct answer.
That's a perfect way to put it. And furthermore, the explicit focus on critical consciousness, why Naki, is really the only way to manage the inherent contradiction, the Tad al-Afkar, in modern discourse. They are taught not to run from contradictory information, but to process and evaluate multiple streams, recognizing the flawed premises or logical errors in opposing ideas.
It transforms the chaos into an opportunity.
It transforms the potential chaos of the information age into an intellectual opportunity, strengthening the core conviction every time a doubt is successfully neutralized.
I think we can use that analogy we touched on earlier to synthesize this connection. You are building a ship, but it is one designed specifically for stormy, modern seas.
I like that.
You need reinforced structure, which are the pillars: unity, prophethood, and afterlife. You need navigational tools that function in high-traffic waters, which is the methodology of proof, dialogue, and clarity. And crucially, all of this must be specifically designed to withstand the modern currents, which are the characteristics of this generation, their demand for verification and their constant exposure to contradiction.
That is the perfect architectural synthesis. The construction is about engineering a modern cognitive tool ready for application in a high-pressure, information-saturated environment. It's a structure that must be robust, demonstrably proven, and capable of perpetual self-defense, relying equally on logical argument and internal sincerity.
This has been a remarkably deep and comprehensive look at the internal logic of this educational framework. Let's bring it home and synthesize the key takeaways for you, the listener.
Okay.
We started by analyzing Ahmed al-Said's blueprint for the ideological construction for the rising generation, exploring the foundations laid out by Taqween studies and research. We looked at the necessity of the construction, based on the need for al-Isis, the foundation, and al-Mutah, immunity.
Right.
We dissected the three foundational pillars: unity, prophethood, resurrection, and the crucial strategic objectives of achieving certainty, yaqeen, critical consciousness, wayanaki, and resilience.
And we then detailed the prescriptive, targeted methodology from clarity in presentation, al-Wato, and reliance on core texts, nuya al-Mukama, to the strategic use of productive dialogue, al-Jadal al-Malud.
And we showed how it all connects.
We then showed how defensive strategies, internal fortification, al-Qalb, and intellectual defense like spotting Madri al-Kaya are necessary responses to the unique, high-pressure characteristics of the modern youth. Their inherent need for proof, al-Bath, their exposure to conflicting narratives, al-Akakar, and their focus on immediate experience, al-Mahashalar.
So what are the big takeaways?
For you, the learner who is absorbing this complex framework, the primary takeaways are deeply structural. First, ideological strength, as articulated in this document, it relies equally on three fully integrated components. You need strong foundational knowledge, which are the pillars. You need effective, engaging teaching methods, the methodology. And you need proactive, sustained defense, the immunization. None of these components can function alone. They have to be integrated to form that cohesive, resilient albina.
And what's the second, maybe more abstract takeaway about the nature of modern inquiry?
The second takeaway is that the framework explicitly and, I think, successfully integrates strategies to manage the challenges of modern skepticism. It doesn't ignore complexity. It mandates a disciplined intellectual response.
Especially through Wanaki.
Especially through the emphasis on developing Wanaka critical consciousness. This concept of disciplined analysis, which teaches one to deconstruct opposing arguments and recognize logical flaws, is the document's modern answer to information overload and pervasive intellectual conflict. It shows an educational approach deliberately designed to handle skepticism and diversity of thought through a rigorous, constructive methodology.
That focus on critical methodology is what makes the final synthesis so powerful. The entire practical application of this framework rests on the ability to distinguish that productive intellectual exchange, al-Jadal al-Mahmud, from chaotic, empty arguments, al-Jadal al-Bal.
Absolutely.
The methodology demands that the instructor and the learner must constantly filter intellectual input based on whether it strengthens certainty or merely sows chaos.
And that distinction between beneficial debate and useless argument is arguably the most crucial universal challenge we face in the current media and political environment. The framework uses it as the litmus test for intellectual productivity and engagement. If a discussion does not move you closer to clarity, it is destructive to your structure.
Yeah. So as you move forward and assimilate this deep dive, regardless of the underlying belief system, whether you're dealing with scientific models, political philosophies, or spiritual doctrines, the source material forces us to ask a crucial, universal question for modern life. In an era saturated with information, opinions, and constant noise, how do we reliably distinguish between a productive intellectual exchange that strengthens understanding, clarifies facts, and builds something tangible, versus distracting, empty argumentation that only serves to sow chaos, confusion, and doubt?
And what criteria do you apply to the arguments you consume and participate in to ensure they are manmood, beneficial, and not bail useless?
Something critical for you to ponder as you reflect on this robust architecture of belief. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with another stack of sources and a vision to make you instantly informed.